While thank you for recording. If you would go ahead and just say hello in the chat and introduce yourself so we know who's here. We are now in session 5 of our mentoring workshop. So many of you I know and recognize from previous sessions. And we're so glad that you're taking an hour of your time today to be here. So please go ahead in the chat and introduce yourselves and say hello. That would be great. And we know everything's working well. Looks like Ethiopia is winning with the best coffee so far. Hi, Anna, good to see you. Hey, Angie, glad you're here. Okay, and you all can see the full slides right now. Could someone just confirm with a thumbs up or nod of the head? Okay, great. Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started since it's a few minutes after 9. Thank you for saying hello. Hi, Yared. Hi, Tanta. Nice to see you. Juliet, thank you for being here. Meseret, nice to have you in this session. So we've as you know, we've been, this is our 5th in the session, as I just mentioned, with a focus on mentoring for the Tuberculosis Research Advancement Center, and we're really excited to continue to talk about this important topic. Continue to introduce yourself in the chat. And if you have any questions that are either about our topic today or any of our previous sessions that perhaps you have questions left over from other things we've discussed, please feel free to go ahead and put that in the chat, and I'll be checking that on occasion just to make sure we get to those questions. As a reminder, we have multiple international collaborations, and we're so thrilled to be able to talk about mentorship and think about how to improve mentorship for TB research across a number of our international sites. As I mentioned, this is our 5th session, and we have one more after this that will be coming up on November 30th on building mentoring at the institutional level, so more about programmatic tips rather than individual tips, which is what we've been working on so far. So we hope we'll see you at that last session as well. What we're going to talk about today is really mentoring in diverse contexts, or different types or approaches to mentoring. So I'm going to start by talking about, I'm going to kind of hit all of these at a high level to give you some exposure to different ways to think about mentorship. I'm going to start with something called the mentor map and then go into mentoring teams and group mentoring. And then I'm going to move into how to think about supporting yourselves with peer support through peer mentoring, accountability partners, and pods. And these all present different opportunities to think about how to build mentoring capacity depending on your unique situation at your institution, where you're at in your career, the resources available to you, and what might work best. So the first thing I'm going to share with you is something called the mentor map. And then if we could go ahead and throw this in the chat, that would be great so that you can see this as well. So this is something some of you may have seen before. Actually, let me even ask you in the polls here. Hang on. Let me give you this. Let me go back, and I'm going to ask you if you have ever seen this. So as you're looking at this in front of you, I'm just curious how many of you have used or seen the mentor map before. I know some of you have been in my trainings before, so I've showed this to you before. The reason why I'm going to start with this is that this is a big picture view of a range of support that you can actually have in your mentoring relationships. This mentor map comes from, as you can see, NCFDD, which is the National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity. This is a great organization that works with faculty across a number of topics and domains, but specifically does address mentorship. Their goal is also really to think through how to support diverse faculty from different backgrounds, faculty with different identities, so racial or ethnic backgrounds, thinking about first-generation scholars, so those scholars or faculty who might be, or graduate students who might be first in their family to attend graduate school, international scholars thinking about working across countries. So their goal is really to provide mechanisms for support for mentoring across difference and to, again, support a wide range of faculty at different levels. However, what I think is really helpful, and I'm going to just talk about this at a high level, and then you can download it and take a look at it. And if you go to this website, there's detailed descriptions of each one of these categories. But what I want you to notice right here is if you look at this access where my mouse is pointing, this access to opportunities, you'll see they suggest having internal mentors, which means mentors that are within your organization or department, peer mentors, which is colleagues, which I'll talk about in a minute, and external mentors, which are those mentors who might have more of an arm's length distance to either your department, perhaps your topic, but still provide valuable career advice. And I think what you can see here is that mentorship is clearly important as it provides access to opportunities, but you need other types of support in your career as well. So just briefly, you can see they suggest sponsorship, so someone who's advocating for you, somebody who is just important in terms of providing feedback, professional development opportunities. These might be trainings or other things that advance your career skills. And then they also include things like emotional support, right? Which is like your family, perhaps your religious community, perhaps your extended family and friends. So that is equally as important, right, as your professional opportunities. And then also just people who can read your work and provide feedback, provide a safe space to be yourself, or down here, perhaps just role models who you look up to for inspiration, right? So I take a look at this and download it. I think you could have one person in multiple categories here, but I like this picture because it shows you, or perhaps you can share this with your mentees, how you can think really broadly about the support you need to be successful. The other reason why I share this, and I think it's really important, is because as mentors, you are still maintaining your own careers. And it's really important that as mentors, you're protecting your own time. And so if you find that you have a mentee who perhaps is asking a lot of you in these other areas, you might want to sit with them and make sure that they are asking for support across multiple areas of their lives so that you can really focus on the part you need to focus on with them. And that eventually will help you save some time. All right, any questions about that as I move on? Please go ahead and put that in the chat, and I hope you're able to download it. And please do visit that website. It's a great resource for faculty, particularly faculty support, but a lot of what you'll learn is relevant to PhD students, postdocs, and et cetera. All right, so what I wanted to talk next about is mentoring teams. This has come up quite a bit in our previous sessions, and I'm going to just hit on it briefly here, but I would love if you have any questions, that you have about mentoring teams, to go ahead and put them in the chat so we can stop for a minute in addressing and address those questions. So let me go ahead and get our poll up here, so we can learn a little bit about you. I'm curious now if you could tell me, are you currently a mentor on a mentoring team? Yes or no? Or are you currently a mentee with a mentoring team, just to get both perspectives? Okay, great. So it looks like about half of you are a mentor on a mentoring team and half of you aren't, and same thing with being a mentee. So a good distribution here across experiences. Okay, great. So mentoring teams, of course, are extremely popular right now, especially when you're thinking about team science and the relevance of team science, and the fact that often our work now as researchers is really spanning across different disciplines. And so mentoring teams, which means having more than one mentor, it could be one or it could be 3, some perhaps even 4. That could be really helpful when junior faculty, postdocs, PhD students, even master students are thinking about their next steps in their research. So sometimes more than one mentor is necessary to guide a career, which would really call into action the need for a mentoring team. This allows a mentee or a trainee to have guidance across multiple disciplines, methodological approaches and fields, and it allows them to receive feedback, right, from diverse colleagues with different approaches. This is actually incredibly common and often required for our career development grants from the NIH. And also, I know in our department here in the School of Public Health for our PhD students, we also put together mentoring teams for them to help guide them through their research projects and just their overall success in our department. And this allows a mentee, of course, to have access to a broader range of professional networks and affiliations as well. So as you know, a key role of mentorship is to introduce people to other networks, and this allows this to happen across a broader scope of work and fields. One of the other reasons why mentoring teams are really helpful is that often mentors are very busy, and sometimes a trainee will need more time and guidance than one mentor can provide. So in addition to diversifying the skills and knowledge they're receiving from mentors, it also allows mentors themselves to have perhaps more focus but less time with mentees, and making sure those relationships are realistic and feasible with their own careers, with your own careers as mentors. So having more than one mentor can help disseminate the workload of a mentor. Also, I think that this is a kind of a United States context, but I think in other countries as well, sometimes mentees really want a mentor that look like them or come from a similar background or share gender identity or racial or ethnic identities. And I know here in the United States, sometimes there are not enough people of color representing higher levels of university leadership or in professor roles. And that's having a mentoring team allows a mentee to perhaps pick people who have similarity in science, similarity in racial and ethnic background and experiences in the university, as well as perhaps somebody has community experience. So if one person can't offer everything, a mentoring team perhaps allows a mentee to feel more supported in the ways that are really important and unique to them. So mentoring teams can be very helpful in that way. I wanted to mention briefly, or at a higher level, some steps to thinking about a mentoring team. And especially if you have one mentor and you're at a point where perhaps you want that team to grow. So if you're a mentee, this is helpful for you. But if you're a mentor and feeling overwhelmed and like you don't have the skills to support a mentee, you can also help your mentee build their team, right? So first, I think it's really important if you're putting together a mentoring team to make sure you have very clear goals and objectives about what the trainee needs and wants in order to be successful. So why do you need a team, right? And this should be able to be described in what I call, and many of you know, an elevator or a lift, if you're a place where you call it a lift pitch. Meaning that you should be able to succinctly explain why you need a team and what it is you want to come from this mentoring team with your own career. Then, of course, the next step is to identify potential mentors and invite them to be team members. I personally like recommending with one person as a primary mentor, and then involving the primary mentor in selecting those additional members of the mentoring team. But that doesn't mean you have to do it that way. But really considering across what you need for your career development, what skills and knowledge do you need and who perhaps can help mentor you through those areas. You do want to think about fit and balance, personalities. I think we are all real people. We have different expectations, and a mentoring team can be a lot to manage for a trainee. So it is helpful to think through who are you putting together and how might they work together as a team in addition to what it is they can offer the trainee. I also think that managing a mentoring team, the culture here in the United States is that a trainee manages the team. I know this is different across different countries. So this is something to think about. Who is going to manage the time and coordination of a mentoring team? Again, here in the United States, we advocate that the mentee is the one who puts together the team, schedules the meeting, writes agendas, does notes, disseminates notes. We've talked about that in earlier training sessions as a way to align expectations. So really being thoughtful about that team management, if you're going to put together a team, is critical, and staying up on that team management. One thing that I've heard back from with mentors and across teams is that sometimes, mentors will have individual areas of guidance, and to be really clear about that. So mentors know where to invest their time, or perhaps when someone else on the mentoring team is taking care of that. So some meetings together at some regular frequency is helpful, and also open conversations about what the role of each mentor is on the team is really beneficial to everyone involved. And then lastly, we've talked about this in previous sessions too, really evaluating the progress of mentorship. I always recommend from the beginning, if you're developing a team, set checkpoints. Like every 4 months, you'll have some check-in, what's working well and what could be improved, even if you're only asking those 2 questions. And really diving into, do you need to schedule different meetings at different times? Do you need to have more clear processes for reviewing manuscripts that the mentee is writing, or reviewing scientific presentation PowerPoint slides, providing guidance on research methods? What is it that's working well and what could be improved moving forward? So I really advocate for checking in and making course corrections as needed with that mentoring team. Okay, so I'm going to pause there and just ask if there are any questions about how to put together mentoring teams or how to run mentoring teams, especially if you're in one right now and you have questions about how it's been going for you or problem solving. Please go ahead and type it in the chat, and I'll just pause for a minute and see if we have any questions. Thanks everybody for introducing yourselves. I'm just going back through the few messages and seeing a few other things. Okay, let's keep moving forward then. Seeing a question in the chat. So we have 10 interns in our department. While we do have a team, it's not always possible to allot time for the mentees, so sometimes we don't have anyone to touch with them. Okay, so Dr. Mukesh, hopefully I'm pronouncing your name correctly, please feel free to correct me. I'm going to talk about group mentoring actually next, which might help with this question. So I'm going to hold on to this for a minute, but please feel free to unmute and say more in a minute if you want. I also just want to mention that I've gotten a few questions about this group mentoring process too, and I think this can be a really helpful way to address mentoring when there may not be enough mentors to do individual mentoring pairs. And actually, that's something I thought about a lot when I was putting together this presentation, and I think about this a lot when I'm giving trainings across different countries and different organizations here in the United States, is that sometimes we don't have the resources to align mentees one-on-one with mentors. And so these things I'm suggesting today are different ways to think about mentoring that might allow some mentorship to exist in some ways across a different type of groups of people. So group mentoring can be thought of in different ways. But typically what we're talking about with group mentoring, which might work when you have something like 10 trainees and not enough mentors, if that's what you're suggesting, although please let me know if I'm misunderstanding that question. But one way to think about group mentoring is that a mentor, and I've used this myself, and I know other of my colleagues have used this, and we've had some discussions about this, is when you have several trainees at a similar stage of career development. This might work better with more junior trainees like postdocs, or maybe even not postdocs, maybe perhaps PhD students or master's students, even undergrads. And I know many of you here do mentor across a spectrum of trainees, is that you meet with them as a group rather than having one-on-one meetings. And that allows you to meet with them. You might meet with them weekly if they're in your lab. So often I see group mentoring happening with with faculty members or researchers who lead a lab. And so rather than having one-off meetings with everyone, they meet weekly, bi-weekly, even monthly with a group of mentees together. This allows a mentor to share advice and wisdom at one time rather than saying it 3 times. And in addition, it cultivates this environment of support for the mentees to learn from each other, right? So I've always really emphasized, as one mentee asks a question, it's great because it's most likely that another mentee is thinking that question as well, or should be hearing or should be having that question. And so one way to kind of make your mentoring more efficient is to run it as a group. You save time, you answer questions all at once. There's a feeling of professional support amongst the mentees. I often always encourage the mentees to talk to each other outside of our mentoring group. So they often have a group me or a WhatsApp between them where they can ask questions as they come up between our meetings. And that way they have support during our meetings and also outside of our meetings. I also often ask one of my mentees to lead the group meetings and have them take turns leading these group meetings, which again alleviates a little bit of the prep work on the side of the mentor and allows the mentees to really bring forward topics that are important to discuss in their research and their mentorship, right? In addition, I think that, more advanced mentees, so example, doctoral students might really learn a lot from teaching important things to more junior or perhaps undergrad mentees. And so it allows this environment where more advanced trainees can learn from less advanced trainees. And we all know that we learn by describing and sharing our experiences. And so this is a really positive environment for something like that. So does that help answer that question a little bit? I would love to, I'm sorry, I can't see everybody right now while I have my slides up, but you're welcome to unmute and ask. Okay, and I got your name. Oh, thank you. I'm glad I got your name right. And please feel free to unmute and ask a question. I'll just pause for a minute in case you want to say more. So it sounds like group mentorship might be great in this scenario. And I feel like anyone's welcome to share their own experiences and unmute, but I really feel like this has been a positive experience. The only time where this might be a challenge is I had one situation in a group where I had one trainee who really was not doing well and was far behind all the other trainees. And this trainee also had an incredibly outgoing personality and would derail our meetings. And that that group didn't work well. I had to address that. But otherwise, I've had a lot of success with this. So I offer this as one mechanism for mentorship. Any other questions or thoughts or experiences about group mentorship? Please feel free to unmute or type it in the chat. Okay, so let's shift directions a little bit. Those 2 examples I gave you of the mentoring teams and group mentoring is really still with kind of thinking about the fact that you have one more advanced mentor who's kind of translating or transferring and providing guidance to those who are less experienced. These next 3 examples I give you are really about peer support. So how can you, in addition to having mentorship, I think, or if there's not mentorship available, how can you create kind of similar relationships of support to make sure careers are advancing and you're getting everything possible to really be successful. All right, so let's talk a bit more about this. And I do have another poll. So let me see what I have going here with the polls. So I'm curious, just before I get started, if you, who's in the room, if you have ever been in a formal peer mentoring relationship, meaning that you've discussed it was a peer mentoring relationship, and you had some activities that helped and supported each other's careers, or have you ever been in an informal peer mentoring, meaning looking back on it, or perhaps you can answer this question better after I talk about it, but looking back on it, you probably had a lot of peer support and it probably was peer mentorship, even though you didn't talk about it. All right, so no one with formal peer mentoring, or a maybe, not sure, it looks like in our first poll. A few more, waiting for a few more of you to respond. One person, yes, with formal peer mentoring, but many of you sharing that you have had important peer support, almost 75% with informal peer mentoring. Okay, great. A few maybes in there, waiting for a few more folks to respond. So have you ever had formal peer mentoring relationship or an informal peer mentoring relationship? And please, again, feel free to share your experiences in the chat or unmute and share with them as we talk about this. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk through a little bit more about what this looks like when we implement peer mentoring. First of all, I want to say one of the reasons why this may be evident to everyone, but just as a reminder, when we've surveyed mentees before that are in training programs and we've asked them, what are the challenges with mentorship? Some of the things that have come up, even in successful mentoring relationships, are time constraints, mentors just being busy, or their own time as mentees being busy and having a hard time aligning meeting times. Communication gaps, meaning the mentee saying one thing and the mentor is saying one thing, and the mentee's not always sure if they're understanding the mentor correctly or if they're expressing themselves clearly. Different expectations. We had a whole session on how to align expectations between mentors and mentees. And what we find, of course, is that people enter relationships with these kind of hidden assumptions, and it takes a while to clarify those expectations. Boundaries, meaning that sometimes the mentees say they're not sure how much they should share about their personal lives or even their professional lives with their mentors or vice versa. And also just the overall workload, and that it's hard sometimes to get everything we need from one mentoring relationship or into an hour meeting. Sometimes mentorship is more, if you work with someone in a lab, you may be seeing your mentor daily, of course, that's a little bit easier, but sometimes the workload can interfere with getting everything we need from a support relationship like mentorship. So I just wanted to say a few caveats before I talk about these different types of peer mentorship, is that seeking support from peers should in no way interfere with the formal mentorship you already have, where you have someone who's more of an expert. So that seems obvious, but I just wanted to make that clear. Also, when you're thinking about peer mentorship, it should be aligned with your career goals and at a time when it makes sense, as well as your program goals. And like anything else, when done well, it can be incredibly beneficial. And if not done well, it can take too much of your time away from your goals. So just being mindful of those caveats is helpful as I discuss these different types of peer mentorship. So let's first talk about a peer mentoring model. I have personally found this really helpful in my lives, and I've received positive feedback from others. So a peer mentoring model is mutually beneficial. It's two people of similar ranks or positions mentoring each other and providing support. This allows a more accessible and a more relaxed relationship, which works for some people. But what's critical at the core of this is that it's built on trust. So you should be a situation where you're not feeling competitive or threatened by each other. You should feel, in fact, comfortable sharing your experiences, providing feedback and receiving feedback from each other, and really providing genuine mutual support for career success. Why peer mentoring? I mentioned already, you may not have more senior mentors available. So if you're working in a department where perhaps there aren't enough senior mentors to mentor more junior trainees, a peer is more relatable and often going through similar circumstances of workload, office environment, culture, working with leadership and the decision-making in an organization, resources available for careers, maybe similar deadlines if they're in a certain training program or applying for similar grant structures or funding opportunities. They may have similar challenges, again, with resources, politics, the environment of work, and also may share similar pathways to promotion, right? So therefore, peer mentors really can offer a place to be open and honest with each other, a safe space where they can share their concerns and successes, talk through examples of their work, offer advice to each other, and encourage support and celebrate success with each other. And what's really important is that peer mentorship offers an opportunity, kind of this first line of defense, where you can test ideas with each other before perhaps bringing them to your mentor. So if you are a trainee having a 1 hour a month meeting with your mentoring team, you can test ideas, review work, right, with your peer mentors before you even get to that meeting with your mentors, right? So do some of that homework and that groundwork before you get to your mentors, and really focus that time with your mentors. You might also discuss your mentorship challenges with your mentees, with your peer mentors, to help work through some of your concerns. You might be able to share more openly about your work life concerns. You can share resources. You can share your processes at the organizational level with things like ethics boards or promotion processes. You can certainly also exchange and share things like grants, budgets, and other materials that are important to your careers. I've found that peers are really a place where this is critical and important, right? So peer mentorship allows us to grow our careers in a lateral way, and then supports, of course, using our time with our mentors in a way that's optimal. So a peer mentor might be recommended by a colleague or another peer. You probably have similar experiences on a daily basis, or you may have similar long-term challenges. On the other hand, you might pick a peer mentor who has a different background than you, but a perspective that's important and complements your work, right? You might want a peer mentor with a certain niche that is similar or different to yours, but also complements your work, because peer mentorship can support you in your tasks and also provide more diversity of thought. When you begin your peer mentoring relationship, like I suggested with your mentoring teams, it's really important to have your objectives and your strategy laid out from the beginning. And that's why I asked you in the poll if you had a formal or informal peer relationship, because formalizing your peer mentoring relationship allows you to be really specific. I'm a big believer in writing things down to accomplish them, much like you might with a to-do list. So I think that if you really want to optimize your outcomes from peer mentorship, discuss it and write it down in the beginning, determine your short and long-term goals, determine what you'll give each other, determine how long you'll meet, do agree on confidentiality. I think that's really important in peer mentorship. Really think about what you're bringing to that relationship, and then again, revisit how well this relationship is working over time to make course corrections as you go through it. And maybe start by agreeing to meet for a year and then revisiting it at a year time point to see if in fact this works. So I'm going to give you an example of peer mentorship. These are hypothetical, but also come from my own experiences and my experiences as a trainer. So a great example of peer mentorship might be this. Doctors Hyatt and Vaughn are junior faculty in the School of Public Health and Epidemiology with different research areas, but within tuberculosis. Both need to stay focused on their upcoming promotion. They need to submit 2 first authored manuscripts in the next 12 months. They need to present at scientific conferences, and they need to balance their teaching and research responsibilities. So this probably sounds very familiar to all of you who are on the call. They both have strong mentors, but they're very busy. Even though they're strong and they're great mentors, they're incredibly busy, and they both have families that require quite a bit of them, and it can be challenging to manage these relationships, right? So this is a great scenario that would lend itself to peer mentorship, because they have a 12-month deadline in mind. They're at similar places in their careers. They have similar research fields, and they really need to make sure they have the support necessary to succeed. So, and this example of peer mentorship, Hyatt and Vaughn would be weekly for 1 hour on Friday mornings. And I know this, although again, I've changed some details on this relationship, this was incredibly successful, and they agreed to do it for 1 year, right? And in that time where they meet once a week for an hour, they share each other's accomplishments or setbacks. They set goals for the week. They talk through challenges and work through solutions. They may share particular portions of their manuscripts or talk about their presentation and manuscripts. They also share resources and talk about how they can have additional support if what they're getting isn't helping them through their challenging areas. Most importantly, they celebrate their success. And then also notice they share pictures of their kids and talk a little bit about their personal life in a way that perhaps they don't have time to do with their more formal mentors. So in this scenario, they're able to make progress in their careers, trust each other, build a friendship, while also still taking advantage of a more formal mentoring relationship. So I'm going to pause and just ask, what questions do you have at this point about peer mentoring? And I'm curious if in your own experience, I've asked you already on the poll, it looks like half of you have at least had some peer mentorship. But I'm curious if you feel like this is something that would be helpful to you or benefit your career at this point, or if you have any questions about how to move forward with peer mentoring. So I'll pause and let you type in the chat. Or if you'd like, you may unmute as well and ask a question. Okay, well, let's move forward. Peer mentorship is, I think, really ideal. Again, it can be formal and informal. And I want to talk a little bit now about accountability partners. There is overlap between these two types of relationships, but there are some unique aspects of accountability partners that I think are really important and can be incredibly helpful when they're used strategically. I'm going to pause for a second. Russell, I see your question. Do you think peer mentorship used to happen more naturally in work, but as careers have become more busy, we are losing out on this valuable life and career support? I think that's a great point. I mean, I would love to hear your own answer to that question. I do feel like sometimes, for example, when people have built-in cohorts, like in a PhD program, maybe med school as well, that it's easy for them to have a structure for peer mentoring, and it happens a little bit more organically. I have seen peer mentorship happen at more advanced ranks, so like full professors, when challenging circumstances happen or circumstances change. So when you're moving from perhaps professor into a leadership position, I think peer mentorship, when you're a new leader with other leaders outside of your own department or wherever it is you're leading, is really critical. Because as a leader, you are a little bit more alone in some of your decision making and responsible for a number of people who are reporting to you, depending on your structure. And I think that peer support at a leadership level is really critical. So maybe in the middle of your careers, it's not as necessary, but certainly helpful. But I think when you're new to a program, you're a junior faculty, you're a PhD student, those are times where peer support is critical. And then also, I think when you're entering into higher aspects of administration or leadership, it's really critical to have peer support as well. Just my 2 cents. I'm curious what you think. You're welcome to write it in the chat. I'm going to move from peer mentors into accountability partners. So accountability partners are just what it sounds like: individuals who hold you accountable for accomplishing your goals. And this falls under if you say it out loud to somebody, you're much more likely to do it because you don't want to have to tell them you didn't follow through, right? We're just psychology tells us that if we say it out loud, we don't like to tell people we didn't follow through on our goals. And so an accountability partner, and this could be your peer mentor, but it has a specific aim, hopefully keeps you on track, asks you good questions, and provides that support and direction. One thing I want to offer you with an accountability partner is that it's possible it will save you time, because you can make this a very short and sweet relationship with more frequent but more direct meetings. And what I mean by that is, oops, I lost my mouse for a second, is that you have, again, a very concrete set of goals and a timeline that needs to be accomplished. And that, your accountability partner, they can be like a guardrail that keeps you on course with support and advice. And you can enjoy each other and get to know each other. But again, you have to remember your objective is to share what you've accomplished, have you stayed on time, and what do you need to do to course correct to meet some sort of deadline. And I'll give you an example in a minute. And so you should have a genuine investment with each other, but it may not be as holistic as in peer mentoring. So a characteristic of a good accountability partner: committed, of course, a good listener, proactive. In other words, asking you ahead of time, what do you need to do to succeed? And what goal do you need to make to get there? And I think you all know when you're writing goals, they should be time bound and specific. So this is a place where an accountability partner, if you say, I want to write a manuscript, or I want to, start working on my specific aims for my grant, they should be asking you, by when will you have that ready to go, right? So an accountability partner is really focused on those outcomes and deliverables in the timeline. So they themselves should be accomplished, but also a cheerleader for what it is that you would like to do. So as an accountability partner, you do want to set time-restricted, realistic goals, specific time for a check-in. You want to share details on your progress. You may need to be patient, and you also do want to celebrate. But a good accountability partner, it can be tough because you really ideally are not accepting excuses from your partner. You really are going to ask them, why aren't you getting that done? You can do it with a kind approach, and you can be supportive. But since the purpose of this relationship is to produce deliverables and meet certain outcomes, as an accountability partner, that's your role, is to really ask, what's going on? What's in the way? How can we fix these things that are in the way of accomplishing your goals so you really meet your outcomes, right? And so really thinking about encouraging, but also accountable at the same time. Okay, great. Here's an example of an accountability partner. So assistant professor Sarah and Amit are both working on a grant submission, not the same grant opportunity, mind you. So there's not a competitiveness here, but a similar timeline. They're both translational researchers in TB, and their grants are due in 6 months. So it's a tight timeline. They have great mentors. So again, this is a supplement to their already existing mentorship, but they want additional support and accountability with their deadlines, right? So what this looks like for them with their accountability partners, in their first meeting, they bring a timeline and their tasks and their internal due dates, meaning what they have for themselves for their grant application, as well as when they have to share things externally. They meet weekly for 30 minutes. I want you to notice this time, 30 minutes, it's quick, right? Because the idea with accountability partners is that there's no reason to skip your meeting. You have 30 minutes, you can make this happen, and you're going to show up no matter what. Right? So you are accountable to your deliverables, but also accountable to show up to your meetings without canceling. You split this time equally, 15 minutes for one person, 15 minutes for the other person. Each person gets 10 minutes to give an updates, ideally without interruption from their partner, and 5 minutes to ask questions. You give each other advice, you wrap up, and you go on to your work so that ideally you're focused or refocused on your deliverables, right? So again, this is a much more structured approach with a very specific outcome in mind and a very specific structure to make sure, in a format, so that you can get support that you need and move forward on a very important timeline for your career. Now, you might have some additional, I put in here, you can schedule other times and have lunch and have more informal conversations with each other, but the actual relationship should be very focused and specific. So I'm just curious, and I'll go ahead and I'm going to put, I'm going to put a poll up right now. I'm curious, now that I've described this, if any of you have in fact used an accountability partner before. Now that I've described it, is this something that you've had in your life? Okay, no. And then I'm wondering and hoping that maybe this is something you can think about as you move forward. Again, this is a great option when you feel like you're already busy and you think, how can I do one more thing? You can usually get in an accountability partner in a way that's very strategic. 4 of you have used accountability partners. 9 of you have not. So it looks like some of you have had experiences. So those of you who have answered yes, will you just type in the chat, did this work for you? Was it helpful? I'm just curious. So if you answered yes, if you could type a little bit in the chat about how you used it or if it was helpful. All right, while you're doing that, I'm going to move forward to the last thing I'm going to share today, which is the idea of pods. This is relatively new, I feel like, or the language and the way that we talk about it. It is similar to an accountability or peer mentoring groups. So I talked about one-on-one peer mentoring or accountability partners. You could feasibly do that in a group format as well. But I'm going to use the term pods to really describe a small group of individuals with similar skills working for a shared purpose to complete a project or accomplish some set of goals. When you're creating a pod, again, similar to your other kind of types of mentoring teams and peer support, again, you want to establish a goal or a deliverable. So this isn't just happening out of the blue. This is very strategic and aimed. So when you develop your pod, which is a group of people who, again, are working for a shared purpose, you want to discuss what is our purpose as a pod? What do we hope to accomplish? And why are we as members of this pod appropriate for this group and this purpose and goal, right? Ideally, you would assign a leader or co-leaders because you do want someone to step up to organize your meetings and make sure they're on the calendar and that those goals are clear. And ideally, this person who's leading is well versed, right, in the expectations of a pod and how they work, and can really structure those pod meetings and lead those pod meetings, although certainly you could take turns on that. Assembling your team, you want to be deliberate about, again, having a group of people that have a similar goal in common. I'm going to share an example in a minute. Pods can be between 3 and 6 people. They can have a diversity of backgrounds, but again, share similar goals. And they should be able to contribute to the pod and helping other people, as well as receiving advice and support from that pod. Typically with pods, again, you should have meetings from 30 to 60 minutes. So if you have more pod members, your meetings would be longer. You would have regularly scheduled meetings, weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly. You would determine ahead of time how long this pod would last. So 3 months to a year is typical. And then each meeting has a dedicated leader to, again, make sure that each pod member has a chance to check in and gain support from that pod. So it would be structured. So 5 people, each person gets 10 minutes for discussion at the end of the hour. You check in on your goals, what you accomplished in the time in between meetings, and again, ask questions about support, ideas, brainstorming, resources, etc. It's very possible these pod members might meet one-on-one or with each other outside of the pod meetings, but those meetings themselves are to push forward the objectives of each person in the pod, right? Move their work forward. The benefit of pods, you can be efficient. It's great communication with each other. You learn about other people as well as learn about yourself. It's a great way to build collaboration within fields of research or across. It's a form of accountability. You may have some innovation as you're talking through ideas with others and others share their ideas with you. And it's another mechanism for support and encouragement. And again, these can happen complementary to more formal mentoring relationships. Here is an example of a pod. 5 faculty members across the School of Medicine and School of Nursing are trying a new innovative teaching method that involves a flipped classroom. Well, this was innovative a couple of years ago, not as innovative now, perhaps, although they are always updating ways. And this example, I think, is really important because often teaching takes a lot of time and takes time potentially away from our research careers. And so one way to think about being more efficient and having more time for your research is, of course, making your teaching more efficient and taking less of your time. So these pod members have mentors that don't have experience in this type of teaching, but they all have similar approaches to teaching. Notice they're across different schools and topics, but they use active learning. They really like to center their students in the classroom, so they have a similar approach to teaching. So it's the first time they're all teaching this method. They're uncertain how it's going to be received by students, so support would be helpful. And they are, however, supported by the school in trying this method. They're all in the health sciences with similar student body and workload. And they want to demonstrate their teaching innovation because that is important to their promotion packets and their annual reviews. But again, they want to keep this workload reasonable so they can maintain focus on their research careers. All right. So this is an opportunity where you could really use a pod to be more efficient and accountable, and as a resource to move part of your work forward and minimize perhaps some of the time it could take in your lives while still doing something that's really important. So what did this look like, this pod in action? The 5 faculty members met weekly for 60 minutes. They assigned a leader to each meeting, rotating between all of them. And in each meeting, they shared a success, which could be really important when you're trying something new and that's innovative and maybe doesn't always work the way that you hope. It's important to learn from each other what works well. They also kind of run through ideas about the new things they're trying in their class. And then they save 10 minutes at the end of that meeting for some general discussion or resource sharing on how to approach this new method of teaching. Sometimes the pod members see each other outside of the pod and have lunch and talk in more detail. They also have a group me or a text string on WhatsApp. So in between their meetings, if they have questions about what they're doing as teachers, they can ask and check in with each other. They also celebrate each other when something goes well. They have a big dinner when their pod comes to a close. And then they share their kind of pod structure and successes back with admin and leadership so that leadership knows, in fact, that these pods work, and it's one way to be more efficient with rolling out new innovation in teaching. All right, so I'm going to pause there, and I'm going to do our last poll for today. I'm curious who has been part of a pod so far, now that you've heard me describe it. And if it's worked for you, I can see at least one yes, a couple, mostly no's. Couple of yeses in there, and I'm wondering if you want in the chat to please type in any questions you have about pods or how they might differ from other forms of mentoring and mentoring support. Please go ahead and type any questions in the chat. All right, so maybe most of you answering no here. I hope you keep this in mind as you, again, if you really see a deadline coming your way or you're trying to start something new and you don't want to take all your time, this is one way to be more efficient. You can start, I use a teaching example. You certainly could use something in your area of research and have it focused on a research goal with similar peers. So do think about this as one way. And if you don't have the time of a senior mentor to guide you, or you don't have a mentor with expertise, but maybe your peers are also interested in learning certain methodologies, learning about a certain area of literature, this would be a great way to do that, is by forming a pod. And again, the key is to be efficient with your time, keep your meetings to an hour, so that you aren't discouraged or feeling like this is overwhelming your work. It's really something that's adding to it. All right. This is just a nice overview of each of these peer support types of mentorship and accountability partners and pods. I'm going to share this in the slides. We're going to send out the slides, of course, at the end of this workshop, so you'll have those. And this helps summarize some of those differences between them. I'll let you look at this on your own later on when you have the slides. And I think due to time, we're going to go ahead and wrap up today. There's a case study there you can look at on your own. If you would take a look at the evaluation link that should be in your chat right now and take a few minutes. We're going to wrap up. I'm going to pause and open it up to any questions. And as I do that, please click on that evaluation link in the chat. We really do look at your feedback and need your feedback. We're hoping to actually continue this series, perhaps offer it again across multiple tracks or in the spring. So if you write in your feedback about things that worked well and ideas you have for the future, we will certainly take that into consideration. There's lots more to talk about with mentorship, as you all are aware, and we'd love to hear what's most important to you. All right, I'm going to stop talking and see if you have any questions. Please feel free to unmute and ask or put them in the chat. There's the evaluation link there. If you would click on that, take a few minutes. That's a really great, I'm looking again at some of the comments in the chat. I like the idea of using a pod for learning a specific skill. I think that's a great example of how a pod can be really useful, right? And then I love that you can celebrate accomplishments like publishing articles together. Like that, sometimes I feel like we work so much on our own. Even in team science, we're kind of individualized in some of our work in a research team. So this really does build some formal support into that process so that we have opportunities to bounce ideas off of each other, build relationships, not feel so isolated in our work. Any other questions or ideas? If not, again, one more time, I'll say click on that evaluation link. And so as a reminder, we have one more session in the series on November 30th. We'll send out some details about that. And we're going to shift from kind of individual group level mentorship to thinking about building programs. This is going to be high level because actually this training takes about a day when I do it at full capacity. But I will give some kind of tips and advice on how to think about at an institutional level, you can build mentoring capacity for your organizations, your teams, and your schools. With that said, I think we posted the Influential Mentors book as a PDF early in the chat. If you haven't gotten that already, that provides a lot more information about a lot of things we talked about today. I'm going to actually stop sharing my slides. Thank you again for being here this morning, this afternoon, or this evening, depending on where you are. This is a really unique opportunity to work across tracks. And I'm here for a few minutes if you have questions. If not, please enjoy the rest of your time you have today and tomorrow. And we hope to see you in our last session. I think we can stop the recording too if you haven't already.